Consider this, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bale Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome once again to the University of Nebraska Omaha campus. Certainly this campus and a lot of places in the state felt what happened, the sort of echoes that came out of the unicameral this year in terms of budget situations, budget problems, budget cuts. With me today is District 4 State Senator from Omaha, Kermit Brashear. We had you here last year before the session, and you knew there was going to be a budget crunch, and you kind of talked about maybe can we broaden the tax base a little and some things. But I have to say, I've never had more empathy or compassion for 49 people as I did this last session. It was tough.
Well, that's good of you. Not all citizens would describe their feelings as empathy and compassion. Not everybody's happy.
We could talk about.
But we appreciate your empathy and compassion.
I would watch because I work out of my home, and I would watch the unicameral in session, and it was grueling. It was not easy to make the decisions.
It was not. It was a hard-working, very intense session, and I think everybody would say that, and I believe that.
But you
my colleagues
raised
comported
taxes.
themselves well.
You're a Republican and you raised taxes.
You can make that claim if you want to.
That you raise taxes or that you're a Republican?
No, I am a Republican, and you can make the claim that we raised taxes. Of course, we broadened the tax base, but I figure there has to be a counterpoint to everything, and so to everybody who says we raised taxes, we didn't raise, all those taxes aren't increasing for everybody. There are a lot of things that we are taxing in a broadened tax base that some people will never, ever pay because they won't use those services.
If they don't smoke, as an example, you didn't
right.
broaden that, but
we didn't raise taxes
that.
for non-smokers with regard to smoking. We didn't raise taxes for non-drinkers with regard to drinking. So all the generalities apply, but they're sometimes not very specific or precise.
What were the areas of the budget that were the most cumbersome? I mean, we have higher education, we have state aid to education, we have Medicaid.
Carol, this is relatively simple. The longer you stay there, the simpler it is to explain, the more difficult it is to do something about. And I deal in round numbers. If you're spending $650 million on K-12 education, and $300 million on aid to local government, aid to cities, aid to counties, all this sort of thing, you've now spent $1 billion. If you're spending $450 million on the university and all its component parts, and $450 million on Medicaid and Medicare for senior citizens, you've now spent $2 billion. The only thing that's left is the $700 million that runs all the rest of state government.
So those
My
four
illustration,
things
that's
that you cited in the beginning.
Four things are $2 billion. And I do try to get people to understand, obviously we're there to serve and we're there to listen to everybody's point of view. But when somebody says to me, close Peru, I know that they didn't understand the problem we were facing. Because if you could close Peru and just shut the doors and
we're talking about the state college.
The state college, you would save $8 million. Well, we were hunting for $700 million.
Well, you didn't close Peru.
And we didn't close Peru.
And now at the last check, and it went so fast and furious, I swear I don't have a scoreboard. And I kind of looked for one. What went and what stayed? We didn't close the correctional center yet, did we?
We didn't close correctional centers, but we cut. First of all, people don't want to deal with the reality that over the last 4 years we've cut $500 million, $500 million. I've had people call me and say to me, "You've never considered cutting a thing." I always figure if they didn't notice that we cut $500 million, $500 million in the last 4 years,
then you must have made some decent choices.
Then they probably won't know. They probably won't notice if we cut another dollar. Because they haven't paid attention, and with all due respect,
directly.
They don't know what they're talking about. We've cut between $400 and $500 million over 4 years. We basically cut half and raised half in terms of what we had to do. That's the simple way to explain it this time, and we have cuts coming again in the future. we will have more cuts.
Well, there's no
We're going to have a continuing shortfall.
The drought is not over. So just
But
that.
thanks be to God, the drought we've seemed to have had some significant relief that's going to change the economics of agriculture
Yes, yes.
in Nebraska. And that is still #1 in Nebraska.
Yes, it is. So you got out, you still have all your hair. You know, you don't look too much worse for the wear. You've had time to recharge your battery. You did cut something that is ended up in a lawsuit, and that it may have bound and may have meant to be in court anyway, and that was the OPS
Right.
lawsuit, joined by 2 school districts.
And
I know
that
you
really
can't comment a
relates-
lot on it, but
Well, and I am a member of the Education Committee, but I would suggest to people that not only relates to cuts or the failure, what some allege is the failure to spend sufficiently with regard to K-12 education, but that relates to constitutional issues involving equality of education all across the state and the use of a formula to try and solve all this in terms of allocating the money. So it's a complex issue.
Right.
And it was out there before we ever had a budget shortfall.
Correct. And their contention is that this formula, which is a complex thing, and it's a complex issue, this equality and different groups of kids and different amounts and with different challenges. Do you think it's broken or needs reworking?
I think there will continue to be issues without getting into the
lawsuit,
the specifics of that. I think there will continue to be issues. May I digress for one moment?
You
can.
For you, anything.
For instance, there are people who are constantly reciting the statistics. And I'm going to challenge them in the future to keep telling us how many students we have and what the pupil-teacher ratio is and so on and so forth is only helpful for a while. The statistics would seem, depending on who the presenter is and how you shape and spin the statistics, they would seem to compel that we ought to be cutting this, and doing this. I'm hopeful, at least among my colleagues in the legislature, that we stop reciting the statistics and start talking about what we have 25 votes for. And that's my way of getting in this conversation to the fact, you can have the most compelling case in the world, but if nobody agrees with you, you won't achieve anything in the legislature. Legislation is about what a majority of people agree upon and want to do. And one of the clearest facts coming out of the last legislative session for me as a senator, as I would stand on the floor and debate, was that out across this state, taking the state as a whole, people are not wanting to cut and save a lot of money on K-12 education. Because here's the catch. It would be all right if it was cut in Omaha, but it's not all right if it's cut in Chadron.
And how do you put a formula together that's not going to gouge somebody?
And it's all right with Omaha if we don't cut them and we cut Scotts Bluff. And that's politics. That's the politique of legislating.
One thing that I guess I couldn't be a state senator. The broad amount of things you handle is incredible. But one thing I would wonder is that there are a number of states, a large number of states, who have similar mandates from their state constitutions. Right. And then we have federal rules and regulations and all and testing requirements. I mean, it goes on and on. But our other states must be having similar kinds of problems.
Yes.
So
you find out there is nothing new under the sun,
right,
and other states are dealing with these same issues, and will continue to work through it. I chuckled at a Omaha World Herald headline the other day when the subtitle was that the Wyoming officials had said, you don't want to let the courts decide this. And that might be one of the reasons for commencing the litigation. Maybe we'll get it resolved in a way that might be preferable to having the judges decide it.
So one of those, as you as a lawyer know, that a lawsuit can oftentimes be pushing people to the table.
All lawsuits don't go to the finish line.
Right. So you think that might be a possibility? Or a hope even?
There's always a possibility that any piece of litigation will settle. They don't always, but there's always the possibility.
But do you think that that the system does need some work? If you can get 25 senators to agree.
From Omaha's perspective, they have a problem that is unique in the state, and the system needs to address the number of hardship cases and impoverished students that they are educating.
Well, and obviously,
but other portions of the state also have problems unique to them.
Correct.
When people want to increase the teacher pupil ratio, that may not work in Whitney.
Yeah, but at least
Whitney, I don't think even has a school district anymore.
South Sioux City, Grand Island have joined in the suit, and they have similar problems, but they're in different parts of the state, so it's not totally unique, some of these problems,
Right.
to OPS.
Right.
I hesitate to bring this up, but since we're talking about education, the issue of consolidation, and I'm not necessarily talking about consolidating schools out where there's vast, you could look to Douglas County. Is consolidation, in the broadest terms, still an issue that needs to be talked about in Nebraska? I don't know. But you're on the education committee.
You can argue both sides of that in again, dealing in round numbers. In the last 20 years, we have consolidated and eliminated 400 school districts.
That's a big number.
20 years ago, we had more school districts than New York or Texas. One would think we should not. We're not very heavily populated by comparison. The tragedy is that 20 years later, we've closed 400 of them. We still have more school districts than New York or Texas. And that points to how important a school district is and all that goes on around a school to the existence of a community.
The sense of community, the feeling
The
of community.
sense of community,
I
having
have a great
community
deal of
center,
respect for that.
having traffic in and out, and having parents and in community involvement, all centers in many places around the school and the school district.
What about something like Douglas County that has, a dozen plus districts?
It has a dozen plus districts, and you have many places in the United States of America where there's one superintendent for as many students as all 12 of those districts have. And then there are principals, and there are consolidations, and there are
Economies of scale.
Economies of scale. And that's one of the issues. I've had people on the floor of the legislature tell me, well, Kermit, if you want to force us to consolidate in the west and central Nebraska, how about Omaha? Why don't you merge Ralston, Millard, District
And
66
then what you'd
and
hear
Omaha
is something
Public.
akin to the NRA argument. If you can pry it out of my cold dead hands.
Right. And
Or whatever it is.
And that's why I'm making a part of my public dialogue with people to get people to understand it isn't always who's got the facts. When you're legislating to make public policy by majority vote, it's who's got the votes, not who's got the facts. So don't constantly barrage me with the logic of what we should be doing.
Let's take
because
it
sometimes
the other
people
way.
don't want to be logical.
What if you can get 25 votes that agree on something, but for a variety of reasons, and it's not necessarily the best?
If you gave me some time to think about it, we've probably had that happen. But
what I'm saying is that your only criteria for trying to get something passed?
well, no, I
mean,
it's not the only criteria. Of course,
but it's
you
the
want
reality,
to make
as
good
you
public
said, the
policy.
politic
But I think voters need to recognize reality. It was surprising to me that we could not cut more in education cooperatively, but then I watched it play out as it relates to a whole myriad of things
that are very
other than just
personal to
education
people and not
that are
just-
very personal to people. Their sense of community, their children, their grandchildren, their sons or daughters who are teaching. I mean, you get a lot of, and that's what democracy and public representation is all about.
Okay. What about, I just read in an editorial in the World Herald that, and I wasn't really aware of it, that Iowa is trying to reinvent government. That they've got some sort of guinea pig departments that are willing to take, I think, 15% budget cuts in return for some loosening of restrictions and things like that. We've talked about, and I think think tanks talk about reinventing government. We certainly don't want to give up a democracy. We don't want to give up, our rights as legislators and as people who vote for legislators. But do we need to think out of the box a little more in the future because of the continuing budget crunch that we'll face?
I certainly hope that that's what we do. Why wouldn't we?
And you might be doing some of that now.
Yeah,
but
I believe some of us are, and it's a question again of whether you get the votes, whether you get 25 votes. But you either tend to do things in government, in public policy, when you can or when you have to. Can is always tougher because everybody has to have a mutually beneficial outcome in order to arrive at the conclusion. Have to sometimes simply compels it. Like, for instance, a court ordering you. That might change
Or
a
even just a
formula.
lawsuit
That may change a
working through the
formula,
courts.
whether anybody wants to change it or not.
But still, you need 25 votes, and who's to say that's going to be a good formula anyway? I was curious about the issue of gambling. There
Right.
were a few bills, and then I think they merged, and I wasn't quite sure. And obviously, the budget just overshadowed everything else.
Right.
Do you think that you'll do something with gambling next session?
Well, I
Allowing some
confused
gambling.
a number of people. I have always been opposed to gambling.
Right.
I have always been a no vote on gambling, and yet I actually proposed a compromise at the end. And of course, for people who want to keep their politics simple, you're either for it or against it, and if you ever change your mind, something's wrong with you because everything's based on principle and nothing's based on compromise, then what I did was confusing. I don't happen to believe in that theory of governing or of public policy. And what I was really interested in doing, I believe that we will have one or more initiatives sooner or later where all this pent-up interest in gambling, which I don't happen to share and don't think is good public policy, will produce a favorable vote, and we will basically lose control of the situation, and we will have gambling everywhere, video slot machines everywhere, a la South Dakota. I don't think that's a desirable
and that may well
environment.
happen if you have a petition.
And if we keep saying no, then I think that may happen. Now let me back up if I can. That we're delusional on the subject of gambling in the state of Nebraska. The state, every time the voters have been asked to approve some form of gambling, they've approved it. We have bingo. We have
Pickles.
Keno.
We have Powerball.
We have pickles. We've had horse racing for 100 years. We now have reduced horse racing, but we let them sit around and watch video screens and call it
Simulcast and bet
simulcasting.
out of state.
We are deriving millions of dollars of revenue in the state of Nebraska for the spending by government, all the while some people saying, we don't have gambling, we don't want gambling, we don't believe in gambling. Who are we trying to kid? I think we ought to look in the mirror. For one thing, we have gambling, we have a lot of gambling. The state even operates a lottery.
Yeah?
Come on.
Yeah.
So don't tell me we don't have gambling. So the next issue is how much and what kind and type of gambling do we want? And where I have volunteered to come across the line is to get as little as possible. The proposal that I offered, as opposed to having some group of lawyers and lobbyists put together an initiative so we have video slot machines everywhere, I proposed a compromise that said you will only have 2 casinos on the river in Omaha. You will have casinos at Columbus, Grand Island, and Lincoln, where you have had gambling, in case you didn't notice, for the last 100 years. And you can have one out west, because everybody out west wants to have one out west. And that's all you can ever have. And those are the only places you can have slot machines. I think that's limiting and controlling and governing and acting responsibly with regard to the subject.
In other words, you feel that in the next, let's just throw a year on it, 5 to 10 years, it's a done deal. Somehow.
Eventually, somebody will. The analogy I use is one that affects politicians: term limits. If the politicians had said back when people first started talking about term limits, okay, we'll impose a term limit of 12 or 16 years. If the politicians had voted for it and put it in, the people wouldn't have. But the politicians kept saying, no, no, no. So finally, the public did what I call a cram down. They said, yes, 8 years. You're out of here. The public's going to suffer for it, but
Well, I think because of the learning
now
curve.
a few of the talk radio type personalities don't think the public's going to suffer, but that's all right. I'll take that bet.
That's all right.
You take 24 people out of the legislature in
Every other
three years.
election.
24 of us are leaving, and that's fine. I've served long enough, believe me. But you take 24 people out of there, you put 24 brand new people in, and you see how the place functions.
Well,
one of my colleagues,
I don't even like to think about it because I've served on boards of directors, and I've always liked the ones that churned out very slowly because I had to learn a lot to get on, and hopefully I taught somebody
I always
something
tell
before
people
I
I
left.
had a great time the first 2 years, and then I found out I didn't know what I was doing. So,
Then you had to really work.
right.
What is your, what would be your pet bill or interest this next session?
This next session,
Now you're on the Judiciary Committee and the Education Committee, so I suppose maybe they might come in that territory, but any territory.
but I deal in.
You
other-
dabble
I've-
everywhere.
I've dealt in a number of revenue issues. I'm going to continue to endeavor to work because we have, I think, some momentum in the minds of people who previously wouldn't even listen to us on the issue of community corrections and trying to get people to understand. Quick background, I'll try and be brief.
Sure.
We're still incarcerating, we still are incarcerating increasingly large numbers of people. A couple of years ago, we were incarcerating more people percentage-wise than anybody else in the nation. Fastest growing prison population in the United States of America. For a state that's been stagnant for 100 years, population-wise, plus or minus 100,000 people,
Yeah, we
that's
were
a
throwing
pretty
them in jail at a
alarming
pretty
statistic.
fast clip.
Well, and I think I said on this show, we built a brand new state-of-the-art prison. We spent $75 million cash to do it. We hired, everybody wants to be conservative, but they want to be law and order. But when you build a new prison, you have to hire 415 new state employees. So you're putting 415 people on the taxpayer payroll forever and ever and ever, I always say. That costs you $20 million a year. We've just been, our corrections budget has doubled in 6 years. It basically went from $60 million to $120 million. Now, for everybody who's conservative, they ought to notice that doubling the cost of corrections costs them a lot of money. The alternative is maximum security incarceration is the most expensive thing you can have. And as we said on the Community Justice, Community Corrections Working Task Force, we coined the phrase, and I'm sure it's somebody else's, there's nothing new in politics, but we need to start locking up the people we're afraid of, not the people we're mad at. And when 27% of your prison population is made up of nonviolent, I'm not talking about releasing violent criminals, but when 27% of your prison population is made up of substance abusers,
Yeah, and we're making some headway in the drug court.
then you are treating people in the wrong way at the most expensive rate you can treat them. $22,000 per inmate per year, as opposed to if you keep them at home, make them buy their own food, groceries, and clothing, put an ankle bracelet on them, make them check in and check out as many times a day as you need to in order to use technology to control their actions. You can do that for about $6,000 per person per year, so it's 1/4 the cost. And I think we've got people listening to these arguments now.
So, are you going to be making more of these arguments? Do you think people are primed a little?
We did a huge bill, the LB 46. We did a huge bill with regard to community corrections and worked it through a task force, had the support of the governor. I think it passed unanimously. So it was a major moment, but nobody was paying attention because everybody was worrying about cutting budgets.
So now it becomes implemented.
And now we're in the process, they're in the process of implementing it, and I think it has great potential.
You know, I noticed, I think your name was on a bill, or maybe it wasn't a bill about high-speed chase penalties. Not a huge thing, but in Omaha we have high-speed chases, and we have people die, and we have police shootings as a result of them.
We have innocent bystanders who suffer as a consequence. That's been a public policy debate for a long time. it may be my lawyer background, but it just seems to me that if we need high-speed chases, and I'm not saying we don't.
No, I'm saying the perpetrator of the high-speed
Then
chase.
if I'm an innocent bystander and I die as a result or am seriously injured, then we have to spread the cost of compensating me over all the people who need. That's the price of being the kind of government we are and having the freedoms we have.
Well, and do we need to make the penalties higher for those that create high-speed chases?
Well, that may well be. A lot of our penalties need to be looked at, but we also have to be careful we don't do what we did a number of years ago, which was we jacked up all the penalties. That's why we have one of the fastest growing prison populations in the nation.
Yes, I know that.
And we scared the judges to death and said, oh, don't take a chance that somebody will criticize you for not locking this person up. Be sure and lock them up and maybe throw away the key, and we taxpayers will feed and clothe and support them. But we don't want you to make a mistake, because if you make a mistake, we'll hold you, the judge, responsible for the error.
I guess, and I don't know if that's even a good thing to do, but I'm saying if laws and penalties do actually deter, and you have to look at that, do numbers support that kind of thing? You know, the issue of does the death penalty deter?
That's a whole other issue.
But what I'm saying is you still have to look at that.
Right.
Is the death penalty off the shelf for a while?
No, the death penalty.
Ernie has his bill every year.
We redid our laws to conform with the recent United States Supreme Court decisions in a special session.
Right.
I thought that was one of the legislature's better moments. I thought we comported ourselves well and did all that in the space of about 2 weeks. We could have been there all summer.
Incredible spirit of cooperation.
The issue, we still need to deal with the issue of electrocution versus lethal injection, but you probably don't want to consume as much time as I would.
No, we've got 40
if
seconds.
I got started on
but if
this.
you could,
we need to do that, and it will be addressed.
If you could get 25 votes on anything tomorrow that you really wanted, what would it be? You've got about 15 seconds.
I'd continue to work on trying to control the costs of corrections, because that's something I'm directly responsible for. I'm working hard on it, and I think the public's beginning to understand the issue.
I sure want to thank you for coming every year. I know we don't solve any problems, but maybe we can get people to be a little more attuned to what's ahead and what to look for.
Thank you for having me.
I want to make sure that you know that we have on the air the Unicameral website. It is a terrific website for researching bills and getting information. If you haven't ever checked it out, you might want to stay tuned to that every week, almost every day that they're in session. Thanks a lot. Senator Kermit Bashir, District 4 of Omaha. Our address on the web is unotv.unomaha.edu. You can check out archived shows, and you can check out this one pretty darn soon. So join us next week on Consider This.